Imagine this for a second. You spend your entire life, I mean your whole life, believing you're an American citizen, born on a U.S. military base, dad's a U.S. serviceman. You grow up under the American flag, American culture, contribute to society, and then boom, decades later, someone tells you, nope, you don't belong. And not just that you don't belong, but you're being deported to a country you have never, ever set foot in. This isn't like some plot from a dystopian movie. This is real. It's the chilling reality for Jermaine Thomas. His deportation has just thrown this massive spotlight onto, well, what does it actually mean to be an American citizen, especially for kids of military families born overseas?
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating and deeply troubling. Because Jermaine's story, his personal heartbreaking story, it doesn't just expose maybe one mistake. It points to what a lot of people are calling systemic flaws, outdated statutes in our U.S. citizenship laws. In this case, it really forces us to confront how we, as a country, define belonging, define loyalty, national identity, particularly for the children of people who dedicate their lives to serving the nation. It really challenges our basic assumptions about birthright citizenship, doesn't it? And the protections we think military families have.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take these complex, critical topics, unpack them piece by piece, and really help you get to the heart of what's important. Stay informed. Today, we're doing a crucial deep dive into what the source material calls the harsh lesson of Germaine Thomas. We're drawing insights from a really impactful article by Steadyscope Media, and look, this story, it goes way beyond just one person. It touches the very foundation of American identity and the legal stuff that holds it all together. So our mission today really is to explore these tangled intersections, Jermaine's birth on a military base, his lifelong belief in the U.S. citizenship rights, and then the shocking deportation. We're going to really dig into the specific legal technicalities, the nuts and bolts that led to this, and we'll look at the bigger picture too, the implications for things like immigration enforcement, for birthright citizenship policies, and, maybe what paths could lead to a more just interpretation of citizenship, especially for military families.
Right. And this deep dive, it's really about giving you a thorough understanding, because this case highlights some really significant, often, frankly, overlooked issues around military duty, deportation issues, and our complex citizenship laws. We'll present the different perspectives that are in the source material, try to give you all the info you need so you can form your own informed opinion. It's a critical national conversation, really, about who belongs and why.
Okay, so let's unpack the story from the beginning. Let's talk about the person at the center of it all. Who is Jermaine Thomas, and what are the basic facts that make his case so compelling and, frankly, unusual? Okay, so Jermaine Thomas, he was born in 1986 on a U.S. military installation in Frankfurt, Germany. His parents, his father was a naturalized American citizen and, at the time, an active duty U.S. serviceman in the Army. His mother was Kenyan. And from his earliest memories, for Jermaine, being American wasn't even a question. It was just a given. It was his reality. He lived almost his entire life, we're talking decades, just assuming, deeply believing that he was an American citizen. His childhood was all tied up with the American military community abroad. A familiar world for lots of service members' kids, right? Grew up speaking English, American customs, saw himself as American, just like any kid born in, I don't know, Kansas or California might.
Right. And what's striking immediately, just like you said, is that assumption of U.S. citizenship. It's an assumption most people would share given those circumstances. But for many folks, especially in military circles, but even the general public, the idea seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? You serve your country in uniform, your kid is born on an American base, even if it's overseas. Well, that kid's an American. Full stop. It feels like common sense, a kind of foundational belief for military families, that sense of security, of belonging, tied directly to the sacrifice of service. But Thomas's experience just completely blows that understanding apart. It forces us to look at the tiny details, the often counterintuitive ways citizenship is actually defined legally, especially for kids born to military folks serving abroad. The common idea, as the force points out, is you serve, your children are Americans, full stop. But his experience just painfully shows us the legal reality can be way more complicated and, frankly, devastatingly unfair sometimes.
Okay, and this is where it gets, not just interesting, but really, truly heartbreaking. Despite this lifelong belief, despite growing up under the American flag, his father's dedicated service, Jermaine Thomas was deported. And he wasn't sent, back to Germany or somewhere familiar. He was sent to Jamaica, a country Jermaine Thomas had literally never set foot in before they deported him. Just pause and think about that for a moment. An entire life lived in one culture, one identity, speaking one language, only to be forcibly thrown into a completely foreign place. No connections, no family there, no grasp of local customs. I mean, this isn't just moving house. It's like having your entire identity ripped out from under you. A total severance from everything you've ever known. The article really highlights this, saying his deportation into clear focus regarding his citizenship issues. It shows this huge gap between his life, his lived experience, and his legal status. It wasn't just about paper, it was about losing his whole world.
Yeah, and this isn't just, some administrative slip-up. The source calls it a systemic failure, a failure that casts real doubt on how this country defines belonging, especially, again, for the children of those who wear the uniform. I mean, imagine growing up with the American flag all around you, American values taught, American education, holding this absolute belief you're part of this nation, only to have that fundamental truth just yanked away years later. It raises this incredibly important question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What does it really mean when someone born on what's legally U.S. soil abroad, on a military installation, is denied the nationality that they always thought was theirs? It challenges the whole idea of birthright citizenship, especially when military service is involved. It really suggests a stark disconnect, maybe, between the values we say we have about honoring service members and the actual legal protections their families get. This case makes us ask, is this the outcome we intend for the families who sacrifice so much?
Okay, so given how devastating this outcome is, the obvious question, the big one, is how? How could this possibly happen? And the article's clear. This wasn't some mistake, like a typo or a judge getting it wrong. It was a specific and actually accurate reading of the existing law. So what exact legal technicality, maybe buried deep in the statutes, led to this? Well, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, as the Cityscope Media article carefully lays out, they upheld Germaine Thomas's deportation. And they pointed to a very precise, kind of overlooked clause in the big Immigration and Nationality Act, the INA. And this clause, this is the critical thing, the sort of hidden tripwire in his story, it requires the U.S. citizen parent to have actually lived in the United States for at least 5 years, and crucially, 2 of those years had to be after they turned 14. That specific detail is what unraveled Germaine's life.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating and also deeply concerning here is just how specific that residency requirement is within the U.S. citizenship law. It's not just about being a U.S. citizen when the child is born. It's not even about dedicating your life to serving the country. It's about this very particular time-bound residency history inside the U.S. that, frankly, many active-duty military personnel, through no fault of their own, just can't meet. Think about Thomas's father. He joins the military young, maybe right after high school, then he gets stationed abroad pretty quickly, serves internationally for long stretches, which means he just didn't rack up that specific 5-year residency, including the 2 years after age 14 before his son was born. So even though Germaine was born on a U.S. military base, which for many legal purposes functions like U.S. territory, his citizenship claim got denied. Denied on a technicality that seems to completely ignore the reality of military life and service. It really highlights these complex, often quite harsh intersections between military duty deportation issues and these broader citizenship laws. It's like a bureaucratic hurdle that, in his case, had absolutely devastating real-world consequences. It turned what seemed like a clear birthright into this long, painful legal fight.
Right, and the Cityscope Media article states this powerful, almost contradictory conclusion about it all. It says, the court's reading of the law was accurate, but the law, in this case, is absurd. And that distinction, it's absolutely critical, isn't it? It means we're not arguing if the court followed the law. They did. Instead, we have to face this really uncomfortable reality that the law itself, as it's currently applied, might be fundamentally flawed. Unjust, even, because it fails to account for the unique realities of military service. The article argues the law just completely misses the point that military personnel, by definition, are often required to move outside the U.S. for years, sometimes decades. Their lives involve deployments, long overseas assignments, constant moving. It makes it incredibly hard, maybe impossible, for them to meet a strict, continuous physical residency rule in the U.S. that has nothing to do with their service or loyalty. And the source doesn't mince words. It calls this not just a policy gap, but a betrayal of those who serve. It's a system that, here, accidentally punishes a child for their parents' patriotic service. It makes dedication to the nation a legal problem for your own family.
It's wild.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, and if you connect that to the bigger picture, the implication is really quite chilling. It's unsettling. It means someone can grow up on what is essentially American soil within an American military community overseas, live as a lawful permanent resident for decades, and still face deportation because of this weird quirk in residency rules, a quirk that seems totally out of sync with the realities and sacrifices of military life. And this is especially worrying for all military families, given their unique circumstances. Their lives are mobile, often global, because of service demands. It raises serious questions about whether our current laws adequately support them rather than accidentally penalizing them. The absurdity the article talks about is precisely in a U.S. citizenship law that seems to punish the kids of service members for the nature of their parents' dedication. It creates this situation where loyalty, sacrifice, core American values, core military values, get undermined by administrative fine print, by possibly outdated statutes. It really is a profound blind spot in our legal system.
This whole issue, these legal technicalities affecting people who serve, is just so impactful. We genuinely love to hear what you think about this. Does that specific rule, the 5-year residency, 2 years after age 14, does that seem fair? Especially given how military service works with deployments and everything. How do you think this affects the morale, the sense of security for military families? Let us know in the comments below. We're really interested in your perspective on this specific point. Okay, so beyond just the legal technicality itself, the Stethoscope Media article brings up another, maybe even more troubling question. It asks how cases like Germaine Thomas's connect with bigger concerns about racial disparities in immigration enforcement, and also the sort of shifting definition of American identity. The article specifically points out, it says it's hard to ignore how racial disparities often surface in immigration enforcement, especially when looking at cases like Thomas's. He's of Jamaican and Kenyan descent. That's a really significant point the article makes. It suggests that, okay, the legal technicality is the direct cause for his deportation, sure, but maybe the way it's enforced, the amount of benefit of the doubt someone gets, maybe that's applied differently depending on someone's background, even when their circumstances seem overwhelmingly American. The article explicitly says this seems especially true for Black immigrants, even those raised under the American flag. It suggests they might be denied that benefit of the doubt others could receive. It sort of implicitly asks, doesn't it, whether race plays this invisible but maybe powerful role in who becomes a target for deportation when a legal loophole appears, and who gets to navigate these complex systems with maybe a bit more leeway.
Yeah, that raises an incredibly important question. It's about the application of laws in practice, right? And whether certain groups just end up being disproportionately impacted. Because the law itself might look neutral, colorblind on paper. But how it's enforced, the discretion officials have, the leeway given in specific cases, that can sometimes reveal these underlying, maybe systemic biases. And this idea of being raised under the American flag, absorbing the culture, the values, the language, but still ultimately being denied belonging, that speaks to something deeper in society, doesn't it? It goes beyond just the words in the Immigration and Nationality Act. It hints at a potential double standard, where people who've genuinely lived American lives, especially if they come from certain racial or ethnic backgrounds, face this tougher, more scrutinized path to having their U.S. citizenship recognized. Even in situations that seem fundamentally American, like being born on a military base to a U.S. service member, it really points to this wider, ongoing national conversation we're having about fairness, about equity, about justice in immigration enforcement.
And the discussion in the article also ties Thomas's case to a very recent Supreme Court ruling. Now, it's not directly linked to his specific situation, the technicality, but it asks this crucial question. How does that June 27th ruling, the one about President Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship, how does that compound the issue for similar cases down the road? So this ruling, it was a 6-3 Supreme Court decision, and it specifically limited the power of lower courts to issue nationwide injunctions against that presidential birthright citizenship order. What that means practically is if a lower court rules against an order like that, it can't just stop it everywhere in the country. Its ruling might only apply in a specific region or to a specific case or just the people directly involved. And the article argues this decision kind of reinforces a worrying idea that basic citizenship rights can potentially be narrowed by presidential order by executive fiat. And then those narrower rights could be interpreted restrictively by what the article calls an increasingly conservative judiciary. So again, it's not directly about Thomas's specific legal point, but it shapes the broader legal environment. It potentially makes it harder to challenge or overturn executive actions about citizenship on a large scale, especially if those actions try to restrict or redefine birthright. It's a subtle but significant shift in judicial power dynamics.
Right. And if you really connect that to the bigger picture, it suggests a potentially concerning direction for the whole concept of birthright citizenship, a concept that's deeply rooted in the 14th Amendment. The Stethoscope Media article asks this really powerful, almost kind of ominous question that hits hard with Thomas's story. If birthright is no longer guaranteed for those born in the U.S., what hope is there for those born under its flag but abroad? That implies a possible, maybe significant weakening of fundamental citizenship protections, a move towards a more restrictive view of who really counts as American. So the Supreme Court's ruling, even though it wasn't about Thomas's technicality, it adds to this overall legal climate where the very definition of U.S. citizenship seems to be under more scrutiny, potentially being narrowed. It paints a picture where that bedrock idea of U.S. citizenship based on the 14th Amendment's birthright clause could start to erode. And that wouldn't just affect people born on U.S. soil, but potentially those born to U.S. citizens overseas, including countless military families. It really underscores how rights we often take for granted might be more fragile than we think.
It's clear the legal ground around U.S. citizenship is definitely shifting, or at least feels like it is. What about you listening? Do you think these recent Supreme Court decisions or executive actions change how you understand birthright citizenship in America? What really stands out to you about this connection between Germaine's specific case and these wider legal trends? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We're always keen to hear your perspectives. Okay, so the Steady Scoop Media article doesn't just lay out the problem, which is obviously complex and upsetting. It also suggests two clear ways forward, two paths to address what it calls a blind spot in our laws. What's the first one? The most direct approach, the legislative fix. What specific change are they pushing for in the Immigration and Nationality Act? Well, the most immediate and probably most impactful path, according to the article, is legislative. It means Congress needs to act. They need to revise the Immigration and Nationality Act, the INA, and the revision needs to specifically reflect what the article calls modern military realities. The core change they're suggesting is really straightforward, very precise, and hits right at the heart of Germaine's situation. A service member's deployment should absolutely not disqualify their child from U.S. citizenship. Period. This isn't just about changing a word here or there. It's about fundamentally updating a law that seems outdated, bringing it in line with the huge sacrifices and the way military life actually works today. It's about making sure that the very act of serving the nation, deploying, being stationed overseas, doesn't accidentally deny a child their rightful place. It's about preventing future cases like Jermaine Thomas's.
Right, and that proposes a direct, sort of surgical legal fix. It argues pretty convincingly that clarity and consistency in U.S. citizenship laws aren't just nice to have, they're essential. And crucially, that clarity can't come at the expense of justice. It can't betray the huge sacrifices service members and their families make. It's really about aligning the letter of the law with the practical realities and the deeply held values we associate with military service. Because right now, the current law creates this unintended, deeply unfair outcome for people dedicating their lives to the country's defense. A legislative fix would basically ensure that children of military personnel born on U.S. military bases abroad are clearly, unequivocally recognized as U.S. citizens. It would get rid of that arbitrary residency requirement that caused all the problems in Thomas's case. It would explicitly acknowledge that military life is fundamentally different from civilian life. It's inherently mobile, often global. And the laws around citizenship need to reflect that difference, ensuring families aren't penalized for their commitment.
Okay, so that's the legislative fix, aiming to close that legal loophole. But the second path the article suggests is, well, more philosophical. It calls for a deeper, more fundamental cultural rethink about what it even means to be an American. What are the core questions the source wants us to grapple with about American identity? Questions that go beyond just the legal text on a birth certificate or a passport. Yeah, this cultural path really pushes us as a society to re-examine how we genuinely define American identity today in the 21st century. The article asks some really critical questions for all of us, doesn't it? Like, is being American just about having a piece of paper, a birth certificate? Is it just holding a U.S. passport, or is it something much deeper, more profound, more about how you live your life? The source puts it powerfully, suggesting that, as Germaine Thomas's story suggests, it is the life you live and the values you adopt. That really challenges us to think beyond bureaucratic boxes and rigid legal lines. It urges us to consider the lived experience, the loyalty someone shows, the contributions they make, the values they embody. It implies that maybe true American identity is more about embodying those shared democratic values, contributing to the nation's fabric, regardless of exactly where you were born or your parents' specific residency history.
And that raises such an important and very timely question. What truly makes someone American? Is it just the document? Or is it the lived experience, the loyalty shown, the sacrifices made, as the article really emphasizes? Germaine Thomas's deportation case, it brings all these pieces, the military-based birth, the citizenship question, the search for justice, into such sharp focus. It really prompts a deeper societal reflection. It makes us ask if our laws actually embody our national ideals, if we publicly celebrate military service and the huge sacrifices involved. then maybe our definition of citizenship should logically expand to fully embrace those who grew up in that environment, absorbing American values, culture, contributing to the American way of life. This kind of cultural shift would mean recognizing that for many people, identity is forged through connection, contribution, shared beliefs, not just through arbitrary legal rules set decades ago that haven't kept up with how the world and military life works now. It's a really profound call to look beyond just the statutes and towards a more inclusive and maybe more morally consistent understanding of what belonging truly means. Tag 5. Call to conscience and final implications.
So where does all this leave Germaine Thomas right now, today? And what's the ultimate message? The powerful call to action that the Steadyscope media article leaves us with, leaves the American public with. Well, sadly, the situation for Jermaine Thomas hasn't changed since his deportation. It's still the same reality for him. He remains in Jamaica, separated from, as the article puts it, the only country he has ever known, the nation he thought was his, separated from his community, his connections, and his deportation coming after his military base, birth, and decades of living as an American. It doesn't just affect how we see citizenship for him, it affects countless military families everywhere, and really anyone who believes in a fair, just morally consistent application of our U.S. citizenship laws. The article makes this really profound point about the weight of his case. It says, look, his individual case might never reach the Supreme Court. There might not be a high-level legal fix specifically for him, but his story should reach the conscience of every American. That's a powerful plea, isn't it? A call for moral reflection, for a collective rethink about what's right and just.
Exactly. And the core belief that comes through so strongly in the article is that loyalty and sacrifice ought to count for something. This isn't just about Jermaine Thomas, the individual. It's about the fundamental principles, the values this nation claims to stand on. And the article ends with this really powerful, resonant statement that demands attention. America, we can do better. That's not just, wishful thinking. It suggests a deep need for us to reevaluate our values and our existing U.S. citizenship laws to make sure they actually align with what we say we stand for as a nation, especially when it comes to those who serve and their families. It implies that the current legal framework, at least as it played out in Thomas's case, is a stark contradiction to those values, maybe even a stain on the national conscience, and that a truly just society would find a way to fix such an obvious, painful oversight. It's a direct challenge, really, to the nation's conscience to live up to its ideals, to make sure the sacrifices of service members aren't somehow turned against their own children, denying them a birthright they arguably earned through their parents' dedication.
Wow. What a truly thought-provoking and, often heartbreaking deep dive that was. The story of Jermaine Thomas is just such a sobering, urgent reminder that this whole question of American citizenship, it's still tangled up in these complex legal formalities and, as the article powerfully argues, maybe outdated statutes. And these things has profound impacts on real lives, real families, and honestly, the very fabric of our national identity.
Indeed. It really pushes all of this, doesn't it, to think about not just the strict letter of the law, but its spirit, its intent, its real-world impact, especially when it affects those who serve the nation with such dedication and their families who make incredible sacrifices right alongside them.
We really hope this deep dive into Jermaine Thomas's critical case exploring birthright citizenship, military family issues, deportation laws has given you some valuable insights, maybe even some aha moments about the complexities of U.S. citizenship that often fly under the radar. And as you think about Jermaine Thomas's story, we want to leave you with this really pivotal question. If loyalty and sacrifice, especially in military service, are truly core American values, how should our U.S. citizenship laws actually reflect those values when it comes to citizenship for military families born abroad? What are your thoughts on how we define American identity today in this increasingly globalized world? Is it just about where you were born? Let us know in the comments below. We genuinely love reading your perspectives and keeping this vital conversation going. And hey, if you found this deep dive valuable, informative, please do us a favor. Like this video, subscribe to the deep dive for more in-depth explorations into critical topics like this one, and turn on those notifications so you don't miss our next episode. Your engagement really helps us bring these important stories to more people.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Deep Dive. We look forward to exploring more fascinating and impactful topics with you again very soon.